travel ban on hold. The Trump administration is looking at its options after an appeals court refuses to reinstate the president's immigration order. Threat thwarted. Police in France foil a terror attack. Now investigators look into a possible connection to ISIS. Conway controversy. The White House counselor is forced to apologize for something she said about first daughter Ivanka Trump. And an apostolic anniversary. 4 years later, we look back at the historic moment when Pope Benedict XVI stunned the world. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, February 10th, 2017. Good evening. I'm Wyatt Goolsbee in for Lauren Ashburn. President Donald Trump is promising to take action very rapidly to protect the United States. This as the legal fight over his ban on travelers from 7 Muslim-majority nations remains on hold tonight. An appeals court refuses to reinstate the president's immigration order.
We are going to do whatever is necessary to keep our country safe.
President Trump reacts after the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals unanimously rejects the administration's claim of presidential authority.
So we'll be doing something very rapidly having to do with additional security for our country. You'll be seeing that sometime next week. In addition, we will continue to go through the court process, and ultimately I have no doubt that we'll win that particular case.
Moments after the ruling Thursday, Trump took to Twitter. "See you in court," he said. "The security of our nation is at stake." But it's unclear what the president's next move will be. The Justice Department, with Attorney General Jeff Sessions now at the helm, is reviewing the decision. The administration could appeal the ruling or bypass that step and go straight to the U.S. Supreme Court. Immigration groups welcome the decision, and so did the U.S. Bishops' Conference. Their chair on migration says, "We remain steadfast in our commitment to resettling refugees and all those fleeing persecution." But the Trump administration argued the courts do not have the authority to review the president's decisions on immigration and national security. And while Democrats call the decision a major defeat, Trump advisors point to the big picture. Kellyanne Conway tweeting context, linking to a tweet saying the Supreme Court unanimously overruled the Obama administration in 44 separate cases. The appellate judges acknowledged there were compelling arguments on both sides. On the one hand, the public's interest in national security, and on the other, the free flow of travel and freedom from discrimination. President Donald Trump welcomes Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe there to the White House. The two leaders held talks in the Oval Office focusing on security in Asia and the U.S.-Japan alliance. They're also working to shore up economic ties shaken by the U.S. withdrawal from a Pacific Trade Pact. Tonight, Trump will host Abe and his wife at his Mar-a-Lago club in Palm Beach, Florida. The two leaders are scheduled to play golf tomorrow. President Trump reaffirms Washington's long-standing OneChina policy in a call with Beijing's leader. That policy requires the U.S. to maintain only unofficial ties with Taiwan, a country China claims as its own. The move could ease anger in China over President Trump's earlier suggestion that he might use Taiwan as leverage in negotiations over trade and security. The president supports White House counselor Kellyanne Conway after she comes under fire. Conway promoted first daughter Ivanka Trump's fashion line during a television appearance. She was criticized by the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, and the White House says she was, quote, counseled. Conway has apologized to the president, who believes she was merely sticking up for his daughter after Nordstrom dropped her brand. The president's cabinet continues to take shape. Early this morning, senators confirmed Representative Tom Price to head the Health and Human Services Department.
The ayes are 52, the nays are 47. The nomination is confirmed.
Price was sworn in this morning and will help lead the Republicans' push to repeal and replace Obamacare. His confirmation was the Senate's 4th consecutive contested vote for the president's cabinet. Debate on the Senate floor over Price went through the night. Pro-life groups applaud Secretary Price's stance on life issues. The Susan B. Anthony list says he will be well positioned as HHS Secretary to champion health policy that respects the conscience of pro-life Americans. And the March for Life president says in a statement, "We look forward to working with Secretary Price in advancing conscious protections and life-affirming health care solutions." 2 more of the president's cabinet picks could be approved on Monday. The Senate ended procedural hurdles for Steven Mnuchin's nomination to be Treasury Secretary today. Final approval for Mnuchin is set for Monday. That's the same day the final vote for Veterans Affairs Secretary David Shulkin is scheduled. Speaker of the House Paul Ryan says Tom Price's confirmation is a big step towards striking down Obamacare, but some Americans supporting the health care law have made life uncomfortable back home for GOP lawmakers. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us with more. Jason?
Wyatt, some Republicans holding town hall meetings in their home districts are facing boos, tough questions, and the wrath of voters. The GOP is trying to deliver on a promise that they've made for years to dismantle Obamacare, and that's sparking some passionate reactions. Hundreds packed into a school auditorium in Grand Rapids for a town hall with Michigan Congressman Justin Amash. They grilled him, sometimes shouting questions. 61-year-old retiree Paul Bonus wants to keep Obamacare.
I am also a cancer survivor. I am scared to death that I will not have health insurance in the future.
Representative Amash calls Obama's signature health law unconstitutional.
It has also hurt a lot of people. It has also hurt a lot of people because people have higher premiums. People have higher premiums, higher deductibles. Deductibles have gone way up.
The crowds across the country in Salt Lake City also got rowdy. For Utah Congressman Jason Chaffetz.
Mike Pence is like the most decent human being I've ever met.
Back in 2009, Democrats were on the receiving end from Obamacare opponents.
Here to represent us as a majority.
Nearly 8 years later, Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio, one of the most conservative House members, tells me Republicans must fulfill their campaign promise.
Everything they said was false. I call them the 9 lies. Like your plan, keep your plan. Like your doctor, keep your doctor. Premiums will go down. Premiums will decline $2,500. Deductibles will decline. They went up, as we all know. The website will work. The website's secure. Emergency room visits will decline. They've actually went up.
A recent Fox News poll still finds the majority of Americans want to see Obamacare either fully or at least partially repealed. Wyatt, as of January, that number, 57%.
Jason, so what are Republicans doing to make the repeal happen?
Speaker Ryan said last week he hopes to wrap up the repeal by the end of March. But in an interview with Bill O'Reilly, President Trump said the efforts could stretch into next year, even if he hoped for something fairly soon.
Jason Calvi reporting on Capitol Hill. Thanks, Jason. Ohio Governor John Kasich delays 8 scheduled executions as a court fight over the state's lethal injection process. A federal judge says it's unconstitutional, but Ohio is appealing the decision. Until then, Kasich is holding off on the lethal injections. The governor says he's confident Ohio will win the appeal. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. A judge in Peru orders the arrest of the country's former president. Alejandro Toledo is accused of taking $20 million in bribes from a Brazilian construction firm. A judge issued an order that Toledo should be jailed during the investigation, but he's in Paris right now. The former president denies any wrongdoing. Police in France arrest 4 people and stop an imminent terror attack. Anti-terrorism officials say they found a makeshift lab with explosive material tied to ISIS during a raid in southern France. Police say one of the suspects was planning a suicide attack in an unknown location. Another suspect, just 16 years old, recently pledged loyalty to the terror group. A pair of suicide bombings in eastern Mosul kills 5 people and injures dozens more. No group claimed responsibility for the attacks outside a restaurant and a checkpoint. Iraqi troops just liberated eastern Mosul from ISIS last month. Syrian President Bashar Assad tells Yahoo News he agrees with President Trump on the threat posed by refugees, saying some are, quote, definitely terrorists. Assad also says he would welcome U.S. troops to his country, but only with his approval. The Syrian president admits he hasn't spoken to President Trump about his offer. Syria is engaged in a civil war that has killed more than 300,000 people and displaced half of the country's population. Joining us now is Clare Lopez, a former CIA officer and the Vice President for Research and Analysis at the Center for Security Policy. So Clare, France's president has praised the work of the anti-terror investigators in his country, but it doesn't seem like those investigators have had a very good track record in France. Seems like there's a lot of potential and actual attacks in France. How well have they done in France, and how well has Europe in general done on anti-terror?
I think the French security services are very professional, as are those in other Western European countries, but they're facing a lot of challenges. For one thing, the numbers of Muslim immigrants are against them. Another thing, the networks of jihadis across Western Europe are so entrenched, and they have allowed within their countries and cities to develop these no-go zones, as they call them, enclaves where the writ of law of that country does not reach. They're up against all of that, and it's a very tough challenge for them.
Yeah, it's also a tough challenge for the U.S. trying to help Europe in all of this. You said that the U.S. counterterror system is broken. What needs to happen to fix it?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is to change policy of the past, to identify and say out loud what it is that we defend, our system, our Constitution, and then what is it that comes against that to challenge that. And those are the forces of the global Islamic Jihad. And we have in this country networks of Muslim Brotherhood on the Sunni side, who are engaged primarily in the civilization jihad or stealth jihad. And on the Shiite side, we have cells of Hezbollah and others operating in this country as jihadists. So we have to acknowledge that these things exist in the country. We have to acknowledge that we are facing the same threat as Europe, although not on the same scale, in part due, of course, to geographic proximity of Europe to the Middle East, which we don't have. But we're facing the very same challenge, Islamic Jihad and the imposition of Sharia.
And certainly President Trump seems to want to attack that. Do you think President Trump's executive order, though, on immigrations and refugees is the right step?
It's the right first step. It's not the last step. It's not the only step. But we need to begin by getting a grip on our immigration and refugee resettlement programs in this country. And certainly by targeting places where a writ of law has broken down, law and order has broken down, the nation state is not in control of all of its territory, hotbeds of jihad, chaos, so forth. Iran, of course, the #1 state sponsor of terrorism in the world, that's a start. But there's a paragraph in the executive order that Mr. Trump put out, which I think explains the broader question that we're facing, and that is we need to be screening potential newcomers incoming to the United States for their willingness to assimilate to American values, traditions, and most importantly, our legal system and our Constitution, and to leave behind any allegiance to any other legal system, including Sharia.
Clare Lopez with the Center for Security Policy. Thanks so much for your analysis, Clare.
Thank you.
Coming up, Pope Benedict XVI made history by announcing his resignation. His spokesperson reflects on the news 4 years later, and will tell you how the Pope Emeritus is doing. I asked a favor of you, and you refused it. I asked it of God, and he granted it. A quote from Saint Scholastica talking to her twin brother, Saint Benedict. Today we remember Scholastica, who dedicated her life in service to God and the Church on this, her feast day. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsbee in for Lauren Ashburn. The head of the Catholic Church in Hong Kong hints the Vatican and China may have reached a deal to overcome a decades-long controversy. China's Communist Party cut relations with the Vatican in the 50s and ordered Chinese Catholics to take their orders only from Beijing, including the appointment of bishops. Cardinal John Tong says the two sides have reached a preliminary agreement. The Vatican hasn't commented. Tomorrow marks the 4-year anniversary of the day Pope Benedict XVI shocked the world, announcing he would step down as pontiff.
Non jam aptas esset manus Petrinum eque administrandum.
Speaking in Latin to a group of cardinals, Benedict said after examining his conscience, he decided he was no longer suited to be pope due to his age. The news stunned the church and the globe. The Pope's spokesperson at the time, Father Federico Lombardi, found himself in the middle of a media circus. Vatican correspondent Mary Shevlin joins us from Rome. Mary, you were in Rome when Benedict XVI announced his resignation. Tell us about the initial reactions in and around the Vatican that day. What was it like?
Wyatt, well, first of all, he made the announcement in Latin, so not even everyone in the room that was there when he made the historic announcement understood exactly what had taken place. The news, the rumors had started to circulate that he had announced that he would be stepping down, and then we had the final confirmation from the Holy See press office, and the whole world was abuzz. We know that was making headlines everywhere. But this was something, Wyatt, that we had no frame of reference for. This is an event that hadn't happened in the Catholic Church for 600 years. So as journalists and even people working in the Vatican, we're trying to figure out the terminology to express what had just happened. And we know that February 11th was the day he announced that he would be stepping down. He continued to reign until the end of February. We remember those moving images of him making his way out of the Vatican Palace for the last time. He got into the papal helicopter and made his way to Castel Gandolfo, just near here, Rome, the papal residence there, where he greeted the crowds waiting for him, said his last goodbyes as pontiff, and gave his final blessing.
The director of the Holy See press office was also bombarded with media questions when that news broke. You had sat down with him this week to talk about Pope Benedict's decision to resign. How does he view it looking back in retrospect 4 years later?
He said that he was surprised, of course, but he said not that surprised. And I asked him what his initial reaction was when he got the news firsthand. He said he found out just a few moments before in order to be able to prep us journalists. And this is what he had to say.
For me, it was a surprise, yes, we can say, but not so a big surprise, because who was working and following from near the activity of the Pope, there were little signs that this was something at which he was reflecting.
So again, not that much of a surprise, and he spoke a lot about how, he, through various speeches, was able to get a glimpse of this was something that Pope Benedict was seriously considering and taking to prayer. And he also talked about the great health that Pope Benedict is in at the moment. He said he does use a walker inside the monastery here in Vatican City where he lives. He's going to be turning 90 in April. We'll see if there are any special festivities for that. And he said he is slowing down just a bit, but he said, as any 90-year-old would.
Of course, but it is nice to hear the Pope Emeritus is in good health and continues to pray and read to sharpen his mind. Mary Shevlin, our Vatican correspondent. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
To see more of Mary's interview with Father Lombardi, check out next week's episode of Vaticano here on EWTN. Dr. Matthew Bunsen, an EWTN senior contributor, joins us now with more. Matthew, what has Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI been doing now within his retirement?
Yeah, as we just heard from Mary, the Pope Emeritus has very good health, which has enabled him to continue doing some of the things that he loves the most. He's studying, he's praying, he's meditating, he's contemplating. We know from various interviews he's given that he spends a good part of his day praying, the breviary, of course, reflecting theologically on the Church Fathers and Scripture. We also know that he spends a good time of his week preparing for his Sunday homilies. I think all of us would give anything to be able to hear those homilies every Sunday.
Sure.
But he's focusing on that, and he's really giving his life over to prayer.
Do you think in that way he's really still serving the Church?
Yeah.
Organization, institution?
Last June, on his 65th anniversary of his priestly ordination, Pope Francis visited and celebrated with Pope Emeritus Benedict. And Pope Francis said something really interesting. He said that he wanted the world to know how grateful he was for Pope Emeritus Benedict continuing to serve, serving with vigor, but also with his prayer, but also for reminding the world of the importance of the elderly, that you still have value and worth. So Francis understands that Benedict is serving us in a way, too, that Benedict understands that simply by praying, you can still serve the Church and the world.
What do you think the relationship is like between Francis and Benedict?
Yeah, well, on the day that Benedict left, on February 28th, 2013, he pledged himself his obedience to the new Pope. And that's been something that has been a hallmark of his time away from the Petrine ministry. He is incredibly faithful to Francis, but he's also expressed his gratitude. As he said at that 65th anniversary celebration, he thanked Francis for allowing him to be safe in Francis's goodness. For his part, Francis knows that he has a counselor and an advisor, somebody that he can turn to every day for advice, someone unique in the world who understands the immense burden of the papacy.
We had mentioned that when Pope Benedict resigned, he made his announcement in Latin.
Yeah.
What was the significance of that? Why is Latin important?
Well, Benedict, of course, is fluent in Latin, both written and spoken. And he wanted to make this announcement in much the same way that his very first words as Pope were in Latin to the cardinals who elected him, by making sure that the world knows that this is the official language of the Church with an official declaration, but it also had the proper syntax, the right Latin terminology, that his resignation was official, but that it was also theologically sound and of freedom.
It sounds just like what Pope Benedict would have done, an intellectual himself.
Yeah.
Dr. Matthew Bunsen is also a senior contributor here at the National Catholic Register. You can read his articles at ncregister.com. Up next, one group questions the Super Bowl's family-friendly image, and Pope Francis has a tip for you the next time you're facing temptation.
Si incomincia la corruzione, si incomincia da poco.
Pope Francis says the grace of Jesus helps us to seek forgiveness. The Holy Father used the story of Adam and Eve to show how the devil tries to deceive us. He says the best thing to do when you face temptation is to pray. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsbee in for Lauren Ashburn. Sunday's Super Bowl thrilled fans with a come-from-behind overtime victory for the New England Patriots, but a media watchdog group was shocked by the commercial breaks featuring ads for R-rated movies and sexually explicit TV shows. Joining us now is Melissa Henson, Programs Director for the Parents Television Council, a media watchdog group. Melissa, what ads and content specifically did you see during the Super Bowl breaks that were the most concerning?
Yeah, well, what was a real surprise for us is during this Super Bowl, which is a departure from what we've ever seen in the past, there were a significant number of advertisements for R-rated movies and mature-rated television programs. Typically, the Super Bowl is the largest, the biggest TV audience for any event all year long, and you have a lot of families watching the Super Bowl together and a lot of kids in the audience. And I think in years past, the networks that have aired the Super Bowl have recognized that and have tried to steer away from the R-rated movie ads, but that's not what we saw this year.
Why do you think it was so different this year? What do you think changed?
Well, I think it has something to do with the network that aired the Super Bowl this year, Fox, which has a reputation for being very edgy. A lot of the ads that we were seeing during the ad breaks were for a sister network by the same parent company, FX, and so they were doing a lot of heavy promotion for an MA-rated FX series.
Well, the Motion Picture Association of America has voluntary standards about not advertising R-rated movies and this kind of thing that's geared when a lot of children are watching programming. Since that's not happening, or it didn't happen this year, do you think now we need some kind of regulation to set in these, what were voluntary standards?
Well, you have to be wary of unintended consequences with regulations. So, for example, we do have a TV rating system in place. The MA-rated shows on FX, that's there because of this TV rating system. But what we've seen as an unintended consequence of the TV ratings is that content has gotten much, much worse. And so, whenever you put a regulation in place, the broadcasters are going to look for ways to skirt it. But I think we need to put pressure on the networks and on the companies that are promoting violent and R-rated programs during shows where kids are in the audience. We need to be putting pressure on them to make sure that they know that that's unacceptable.
How do you think parents can do that, can encourage studios and networks to be kind of more responsible, at least in the way they advertise and programs towards children?
Well, we often say silence gives consent. So if we think this is a problem, we need to be vocal in our opposition. We need to be writing to the networks, writing to the studios, encouraging them to do the right thing, and then holding them accountable when they don't.
Any specific places you'd go for them, websites, certain things?
Yeah, well, you can find parentstv.org. We have lots of tools and tips for folks to take action, as well as contact information for the networks and movie studios.
Very good. Melissa Henson with the Parents Television Council. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we thank you for watching tonight. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, I'm Wyatt Goolsbee. We'll see you back here Monday. Good night, and God bless.